So, good afternoon everyone and welcome to Module 3 of the School for Change Agents. And our topic for the next hour is rolling with resistance. And so many local change agents in the health and care system tell us that actually resistance to change is such a big issue. And we'll also be touching on another issue that is related to resistance, which is about resilience. So resistance and resilience. So let's see who we've got with us today. Fantastic to see so many of you joining us today. You know, this is module number 3, and for us, as the kind of core team for the School for Change Agents, a really big test or evaluation point is how many people are taking part. Because if we get a very big drop-off on numbers from Module 1 to Module 3, then we're not doing things right. But actually, the numbers are holding up really well. So that's fantastic to see. And we'd also like to welcome all the people who will be listening to this web recording later. So whether you're with us live or you're listening to this at a later time, welcome everybody. So let's just meet the team today. So my name's Helen Bevan and I'm the lead for the school, and I'm also leading this session. And I'm joined by our lead facilitator, Pip Hardy, and Pip has got a very important job, which is to support and work with all the breakout rooms and the breakout facilitators. And welcome to all our facilitators today as well. So in terms of who's looking after things, looking after the chat room, so keeping an eye on what's being said and synthesizing for us, we have Kate Pound and we have Catherine Pereira. So welcome Kate and Catherine. And keeping an eye on the Twitter sphere, seeing what's happening, we have Ollie and Lewis. So welcome Ollie and Lewis. And our very, very important technical crew who keep an eye on things behind the scenes are Joe and Paul. And Joe and Paul are there for you if you have any technical difficulties at all. So just to say that, you know, one of the best things about the school is that it's kind of multimedia interactive. So you know, from the last couple of modules, the content that we've had in the chat box has been absolutely fantastic. For those of you joining us for the first time, the chat box is on the right-hand side of your screen, and it's underneath participants. So, you know, anything you want to put in the chat box at all, any comment, take part in a discussion. If you've got links to resources that that you'd like other people to know about and you'd like us to know about, then please put links in there as well. We'd also love you to tweet. We're using the hashtag S4CA, which is School for Change Agents, and also our handle is SCH, School for CHANGE, Change. We've got active and thriving Facebook group. We've had to make it a closed group just because well, some interesting people were trying to join it, so we've made it a closed group, but it's very, very easy to join. Okay, so please make a request. And what we'll be doing is after every one of these modules, we will be doing a summary, and we will be putting it on using it on Stellar on the website. So please join in. And you know, as we said, the school's running for 5 weeks. Each week we're covering a different topic. So week number 1, we talked about being a change agent, and change begins with me. So that was a me week. And week 2, last week, it was about from me to we. And our topic this week is around rolling with resistance. And the focus is resistance to change. And just note there, we talk about rolling with resistance, and that's very careful language. So, and we hope you'll also join us for the last 2 weeks of the school, where next week we're going to be talking about practically how do we make change happen, and the final week we'll be talking about how do we actually move beyond the edge, because one of the things that we say about effective change agents is that we work on the edge of organisations and systems. And you know, just to reiterate, that taking part in the school can make a contribution towards your continuing professional development. Nurses, midwives and allied health professionals, you can use this school experience as part of your reflective account for revalidation. Doctors, we've applied for credits for continuing professional development for the school, and we'll let you know what's happening in our newsletter, News from Joe. And everyone, okay, whoever you are, wherever you are in the world, you can become a certificated change agent. And all you have to do is to watch all 5 of the hour-long talks. So watch 5 hours of talks, either live or the recording. And then we just want you to demonstrate in a very straightforward way that you've applied the learning in your own work. And then you can become a certificated change agent. You can get a certificated change agent badge, and you can put it on your CV. You can put it on your Twitter profile, on your Facebook, and you can tell the world that you're a certificated change agent. Now, just one more announcement is I think one of the parts of the school that people enjoy the most is randomized coffee trials. And what that basically means is that you say to us you want to take part in the RCT, the randomized coffee trial, and then we will randomly match you with somebody else somewhere in the world who's also taken part in the School for Change Agents, and then you have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea together. And to do this virtually, so you can do it over with FaceTime, you can do it over Skype, you can do it on a phone call, and talk about whatever you want to talk about. And you know, just in the context of this, randomized coffee trials were invented by an innovation organization called Nesta. And they did it because they found there were lots of silos in their organization. And in week 1 of their experiment, they did a randomized coffee trial every week for 16 weeks. Week 1, you can see people were very focused on their own silo or bit of the organization. By week 15, just randomly getting people to have conversations with each other. What you can see here is that people were really connecting and learning from each other. And their write-up was called How to Create a Culture of Serendipity. Okay, serendipity, where just magic can happen. And the same is true with the school. Lots and lots of opportunity for serendipity through randomized coffee trials. So all you've got to do, and again we'll reiterate this in News from Joe, is email and say that you want to join it, and then all we've got to do is in the next 4 weeks have that conversation with the person that we match you to. So let's get going. So our topic is resistance, and shortly but not yet we are going to make the annotation tools available. And so we've given you 3 choices. So when I meet resistance at work, or if you're a patient leader or a community leader, when I meet resistance in my work in the community, what do? Do I bring people together with different ideas and encourage the kind of diversity and challenge? Do I initiate a conversation in a hope of understanding the point of view of the other person who's being resistant? Or do I know, because I'm such a great change agent, that I'm right and I just have to persuade the resistors? So, Joe, are you there? Hi, Joe. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great. Will you unleash the annotation tools? So if you look in the top left-hand corner of your screen, you can see a little arrow, and just bring the arrow down and just point on the one that's most like what you do. So let's see how we go on. We're not going to put this in the public domain and tell anybody, so it's good. So I think the most popular one at the moment is the middle one, around having a conversation with the person that's resisting. So, so Joe, can you take the annotation tool away? Great. Let's go on to the next one. Don't when we go on to the next one, don't start putting your arrows in until I say, because I want everybody to be able to see the categories. Because if everybody starts putting arrows before other people see the categories, we're going to have a problem. Okay. So what we want to know is, what is the role that you identify with most closely? Now, some of you actually fit all 6 roles, so it's the one that you identify with most closely. Okay. Are you somebody who uses the care system or whose family uses the care system? Are you a campaigner, primarily? Are you somebody who gives care? Are you an inquirer, a researcher, a finder-outer? Okay. Are you a chief listener, or are you a change agent? You can only choose one of the 6. So, Joe, can you let the tools loose again? What are you? Lots of change agents, lots of inquirers, a few campaigners, lots of listeners, and a few people that see themselves primarily as users of the care system. Great. Thanks everybody for joining in. And oh, that's really great. We're even getting some painting as well. Okay, so Joe, if you can take the use of the tool away, and let's get into the heart of the session. So, in terms of each of the modules, we're going to work on certain capabilities for change agents that, based on evidence, we think are very important. So, in this module, what we're going to do is we're going to look at this idea, this principle of resistance, but from lots of different perspectives. We are going to think about the relationship between intent and impact, because I actually think that, for many of us, thinking about intent and impact is one of the most effective ways of overcoming resistance to change. We're going to have a look at resilience, but we're going to look at it in a special way, building on what Catherine was teaching us last week about mobilizing and organizing. And then finally, we're going to use a model, which is a model I come back to time and time again, called the Stages of Change model, to understand resistance and help people through change. So, let's talk about resistance. Technically, resistance is any force that stops or slows down movement. And resistance is a very important concept in the world of change. I'm going to show you some data now from McKinsey, so it must be right. And this is data which is about leaders of organizational change programs and why they fail to achieve their objectives. Okay, and I think this is kind of really interesting, because if you look at this, so this is reported, why did we fail to achieve our objectives? What we can see here is that the majority reason why was related to resistance to change. So at the bottom we can see, 39% said that the main reason was employees resisting change, and 33% was saying that actually the behaviours of our managers do not support change, which actually is a form of resistance to change as well. So actually, if we are going to achieve successful outcomes, then we need to focus on this topic. And I just put this one in because this is how I feel sometimes. We're trying to make really great change happen that's going to make a big difference for our patients or the people that use our services or our colleagues. And there are so many reasons not to change. We tried that in the radiology department in 1978 and it didn't work. Or it's not in the business plan, or there's no money or resource available, or people will never buy into it. So we as change agents are living in a world of lots of resistance, lots of no's, lots of difficulties. This is my favourite one. This is a really innovative project. Unfortunately, we can't consider it as it's never been done before. So when we think about this topic of resistance, I think what matters really more than anything is like the mindset, the way we look at it, the way we think about resilience. And I was just going to read you a little poem because I find this very helpful, which is actually from the 16th century. It's a Spanish quatrain, and I am going to read the English version of it. And it says, "In this world of many mazes, there is nothing false or true. All depends upon the hue of the glass through which one gazes." And I think, these 16th century poets had a lot to teach us about resistance to change. Because I think that, how we view resistance, how we act upon resistance, depends on the perspective that we have. So to illustrate this, I wanted to bring back one of the approaches that we looked at in Module 1. And hopefully everybody remembers, we talked in Module 1 about old power versus new power. And we talked about old power, being about positional authority, held by a few people, pushed down, commanded, you must do this because it's the target or the quality standard. And we compared that with new power, which is like a current of energy. It's made by many people coming together with a common cause. It gets pulled in, and it's based on relationships and trust. Okay. So going back to our poem, we looked at the issue of resistance to change from an old power and a new power perspective. One of the things I would say is as a change agent, it's very easy to think old power wrong, new power right, or old power not so good as new power. And actually, as we said before, we're living in a world of both old power and new power, and we have to be able to work with both. And even if we, as change agents, got a preference for new power, okay, we have to understand where people with old power are coming from, and we have to work with it. So, let's think about resistance to change in terms of old power and new power. So let's start off with an old power view. Typically what we'd see in an old power lens or perspective is we talk about change as something that can be planned and managed through a rigorous process. So we have a big plan that's supported by the program management office with several work streams and so on. So very often in an old power view of resistance to change, we see resistance as a force to overcome. Okay, resistance is a negative thing because we've got a goal and we've got plans and we've got timescales and we've got accountability. So resistance actually gets in the way of that. So in this view of the world, then the role of change agents is to diagnose it, smell it out, manage resistance and overcome it. And very often in this world, we put labels on resistors and things like laggards, blockers, people in denial. And it's interesting because an awful lot of the literature that's available to us around resistance to change comes from this old power mindset, managing resistance to change, overcoming resistance to change, not now ever, how to overcome resistance to change in an organization. And look at that book right in the middle where it's called Overcoming Resistance to Change. And there's this grumpy person with their arms crossed, in the middle. And, very often when we think about our, transformation programs, large-scale change programs, they're based, at least in structural terms, on this kind of approach. Complex change projects, lot of activities to be achieved, often in parallel. So we've got to hit these timescales. We've got to keep moving forward. I took this one from a very nice blog that was written by Steve Sewell, and it's called "Stop Training Our Project Managers to Be Process Junkies," and it's definitely worth having a read of that. So, what's the role of a change agent with this old power mindset? Here's a classic example here. The role of the change agent is to recognize the causes of resistance and address each one. If this is not done, then the change will be much harder to implement successfully and may not succeed at all. So, it's about being aware of resistance and addressing resistance in terms of us getting the outcomes that we're seeking. Let's contrast that with a new power, lens view of resistance to change. And in a new power world, what we'd probably say is that actually when we think about complex change in human systems, it's often emergent, it's hard to predict, and what we plan doesn't actually happen. So actually, change in this world results from connections, relationships, interactions, stimulating of different viewpoints, shaping how people think. And in this world, resistance, rather than being a negative thing that we need to manage out, is an inevitable consequence of a complex change process. So, it's inevitable, it's going to happen. So actually, rather than try and fight it, we should embrace it and roll with it. And one of the models that gets used quite often for thinking about this is your change process a cathedral or a bazaar? You know, very often in an old power world where we've got transformation plans and we're trying to make big change processes happen, our change process is like a cathedral, you know, a big monolithic, complex structure holding everything together. Whereas in a new power world, it's much more like a bazaar where, you know, people are sharing, trading, connecting. And you know, again, thinking about this from a new power perspective, I really like what Harold Shermer says here. He says, you know, think about it. Actually, when people are being resistant, it's a good indicator of missing relevance, because if people are being resistant, you know, the change isn't meaningful, it isn't relevant to them, and that's our problem as a change agent. You know, our job is to make the change relevant to people. So, what are the kinds of things that we should be doing as change agents to roll with resistance with a new power mindset? And there's lots of ways that we could do this, but I picked out this very nice article by Peggy Holman. And you know, she says what we've got to do is our job is to create the conditions for conversations that are transformational by asking questions, listening, you know, focusing on future possibilities, inviting diversity into the system, and being welcoming. And again, that really ties in very well to me with, you know, that description of new power, which is open and shared and diverse. And secondly, as change agents, we need to be creating opportunities for everyone to express their views, to spot opportunities that maybe we hadn't thought of before and build on each other's ideas. And that really ties in, you know, with what we were saying in Module 1 when we talked about the importance of diversity and the evidence that shows us that when you bring diverse groups of people together, they will consistently make better decisions than small groups of so-called experts. And our third role as change agents, she says, is to create ways for people to reflect together, to find meaning, to find understanding and shared purpose in the change. And I just put some examples here of really good change processes that I've seen people using in their health and care system, you know, where we bring whole diverse groups of different people together, you know, to be part of the change. So, and you know, and very often we're arguing and we're challenging, but we end up with better outcomes. And you know, just a couple more points on this really. The first is the reality that if people are being resistant, actually giving people data and facts is unlikely to change their minds. And again, I'd recommend you to have a look at this fantastic article with some really good evidence in it, which was published last week in the New Yorker. And it's called Why Facts Don't Change Our Mind. And actually what the research shows is that you know, when we're trying to convince people through rational thought and facts and data, the more we give people facts and data, the more they often reinforces their contrary view. So you know, just trying to overcome resistance by giving people facts and data is not likely to work. And one thing that I would absolutely recommend to you is to look at the work of Mark Jabun, who writes about the science behind resistance. And if you look in the study guide for Module 3, what you'll see is that there's 4 references to the work of Mark Jabun. In the reading list, there's a couple of his slide decks, and then further down, you know, when you've got more than 30 minutes, there's a couple of WebExes to watch, and it's really worth it. So Mark Jabun is an emergency physician from the USA who is really focused on understanding the brain science behind people being resistant to change. And if you look here on the left-hand side, this is what he says not to do. Okay, if you're trying to avoid resistance to change. Okay, what not to do is identify the issue or problem that we're trying to tackle. A small group of people identify, this is the outcome, this is our vision, this is our mission, and create a whole load of options. And then we involve other people at the point when we are making a choice. Okay, so we are going to get your buy-in, and we're going to consult you about the different choices. Okay, what Mark Jaban says is, if we do it that way, we're bound to get resistance. And actually, this is the way that we do it the most. And he says what we should be doing, what to do, when we identify the issue, we need to be engaging other people straight away. So we need to make the desired outcome into a shared outcome, which means we intervene at a much earlier stage, okay, so that people are buying in. Not that no people are not buying in, people are co-creating the shared outcome. And then people are part of the option identification and appraisal and the choice. And one of the things that Mark Jaban talks about a lot is the issue of buy-in. And he said, when it comes to resistance to change, talking about getting buy-in, to a change proposal is just wrong way to think. Because actually we don't want buyers who buy in, we want investors. And having investors means to start at a much earlier stage of change. So I'm just going to give the chat and Twitter monitors notice that I'm going to ask you to review where we are in 2 or 3 minutes, if that's okay. One of the models that I find most helpful when it comes to thinking about resistance to change is this one. And it's about understanding impact and intent. Because very often I'll go and talk to another person, somebody in my team, a colleague, about a change that I want to bring about. And my intent is really honourable and good, okay? But the impact it has on the other person is really negative. So it wasn't my intent to create a negative impact, but that was the reality. Okay, because of an awareness gap. And here's one about me. Helen's intent in the team was to give people in the team quick solutions, help them to do their work faster, and get on to the next problem at hand. So when I intervened here, my intent was a really fantastic intent, to help people. However, the impact of my behaviour that was really well intended was that people did not know how to solve their own problems. So actually, my very well-intentioned actions had a really negative impact on the people in the team because my style was impeding their development. So, all the time, when you're in a situation with somebody else and things aren't working for you in the way that you want, even though your intent is good, I think it's really important that we're stopping and we're checking with each other that other people understand our intent and that we understand the impact of our behaviour on them. And I think this is really helpful. Stop talking at me and start talking to me. So I'm just going to take a breath there, and going to hear from our colleagues in the chat room. So. Have we unmuted?
Yep,
I can see that Kate is unmuted. And Catherine, are you going to join in as well?
Shall I go first, Catherine?
Yeah, you go first.
Yeah, and then
I'm just keeping myself muted because of background noise, but I've got some
right.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so it's been a great contribution in the chat room. It's absolutely fantastic, and there's lots and lots of energy. First, it was great to see there were so many people from across the world, and I like the fact that there's been a lot of honest conversations, talking from the heart today about their own personal experience. And Catherine talked about her learning curve was to get off her high horse, and that was a big learning curve point for her. There was also a lot of discussion about should we be using methods such as Prince2 and PMO? So that's up for debate, and maybe that's something people can consider in the chat rooms later. How do we develop project the governance and assurance in a world that we engage and take people on that journey. So really, really interesting, and a lot of discussions about building trust with people and the investment. And it's interesting, you know, when we change the language, you know, when we think about being investors in it, and, you know, thinking about shareholders. So yeah. I really think that's something that a lot of people have been reflecting on today. So Catherine, would you like to add to this conversation?
Yeah, there's lots of Doctor Who references, which is good fun, and also, Helen, lots of people relating to what you were saying about, unfortunately, this is initiative, but it's never been done before. That resonated. Lots of people making contact with their RCT partners as well, which is great.
Lovely.
To see, and conversations developing. There was some scepticism about the fact that data, or the suggestion that data and facts don't change people's minds, and I wonder if that's a new suggestion for some people, and it'd be good to see some more comments on that in the chat box. And then finally, intent versus impact resonated hugely for quite a few people.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Catherine, so much. And Ollie and Lewis, what's happening in the Twitter world?
Hi there, it's Lewis. We've got some
Lewis.
really good conversations going on Twitter at the moment. We've got Kate Emery, who's quoted what you said earlier, Helen, by saying we don't need buy-in for change. We need investment. That's really good. Lots of shares of that and similar posts. And then from John Kolodny, intervene with resistance early by identifying the issue and developing shared interests and outcomes, which is really interesting, harking back to the realistic conflict theory and about conflict resolution in the workplace there. So really good stuff on Twitter.
Fantastic. Thanks. Thanks, Lewis. And you know, just a couple of things there. I completely take the pushback around process junkies, you know, prints and project management approaches. And I think, you know, the key to this is we need both. Of course, we need to have well-organised, well-managed projects, but on its own, it isn't enough. So, you know, it's about getting the right conversations and the right combination in meaningful ways. With regard to does data shift people in terms of resistance, I think that what the evidence that I work with shows is that people are much more likely to change their mind, or to be moved into action, or join into, you know, be mobilised for change. Because we make an emotional or value-based connection, than because we show them some data or some facts. And again, you know, what we want is the best of both worlds. You know, we want a world where, of course, we've got proper data around the right thing to do, but we're able to you know, to put around it a compelling story that connects with emotions. But you know, we absolutely need both. So, thanks everybody for your comments and conversations, and please keep them coming. So I want to say something now about resilience, and you know, there's a lot that's written about personal resilience from a psychological point of view, and you know, lots of people that can talk about that much better than I can. And so what I wanted to do was to actually pick a framework and theme that Catherine started last week. And if you remember, Catherine talked about research that was being done in the USA by a researcher called Harry Hahn, which was understanding what kinds of activists, you know, change agents, deliver the most change. And what I decided to do was to pick this back up, because for me, you know, when we talk about you know, the resilience of a change agent, actually much of our resilience comes when we're able to connect up with other people like us. So how might we use that framework to think about you know, organising and mobilising as a way of building resilience as a change agent? So, if you remember last week, you know, when Catherine briefly talked about this, you know, what kinds of activists are most successful at delivering change? And this was based on research with civic activists in the US, but I think it's equally applicable to us here. And the first kind of activist that she talked about were lone wolves. And lone wolves, they build power and they enable change to happen because they are very expert and they've got a lot of information to give. They're experts by experience often, and they work in advocacy, they provide oversight, they contribute to committees, public comments, other forms of consultation. And, you know, very often we, as change agents, end up being lone wolves. You know, we get invited to things and we're able to contribute because we've got a lot of expertise around change. We've got a lot of wisdom, or we've got a lot of a used experience. And I'm just going to put this quote here, which comes from a patient activist called Annette McKinnon. And you know what she's saying here is the problem, you know, when it comes to patient activists, the way that we get, you know, streamed into advisory subcommittees, we get used as tokens and to help tick the right box. And she's saying, where's the attitude that patients are part of the team in healthcare, that we're partners? You know, why is it that when we're asked to participate, it's always inside a frame that's been predetermined, you know, by the organisation? When will we see co-design of new policies and ultimately co-production? And, you know, one of the things that I would say is that often what happens to us as change agents is that we go into the role of lone wolves, you know, really expert, actually valued for our contribution, but on our own. And what Catherine also talked about last week were two other kinds of activists. Mobilizers, you know, these are people who build power, okay, to make change happen by mobilizing lots of people, you know, and able to call on lots of people to make a contribution, you know, and take action. And then the third kind of activists that Catherine talked about last week were organizers. And what organizers do is that they build power for making change happen by growing leaders. So finding the people, you know, in their organizations and systems and communities that they can you know, identify those people, recruit them, train them to be leaders in a distributed network. So, you know, across the whole system, building a community and protecting its strengths. And what we saw was actually lone wolves are the least effective kind of change agents. So even though they might play, you know, a really key role, they're on their own. And the most effective kinds of change agents are a combination of mobilizers and organizers. And it just seems to me that when it comes to resilience as change agents, okay, we've got to find ways to move ourselves from being the useful lone wolf to actually, you know, mobilizing and organizing. And I have a lot of connection with Jönköping in Sweden, which is the most amazing community. And you know, they've spent you know, more than a decade building leaders in their community. And I think, you know, when I get to meet people from Jönköping, you know, we really see it. There's a massive investment in building leaders, not just leaders formally in the system, but building, you know, leaders of health and care right across the system. And there's a new report coming out next week in Sweden, and one of the ideas, it's about the future of health and care in Sweden, and one of the ideas that's coming out of there is the idea of a licensed patient. So somebody who is actually licensed by the system, not only to support themselves but to support other people. And again, you know, this really fits in with this idea of you know, mobilizers and organizers. And I think the more we can mobilize, the more that we can organize, you know, the more resilient we're going to be. And Joe Simpson understood this. He says, great social movements get their energy by growing a distributed leadership. And often when we look at social movements and we talk about health as a social movement, we think it's about mobilizing, you know, we think it's about getting loads and loads of people engaged. But that's not where social movements really get their energy. They get it by growing a distributed leadership. So, you know, who are the people that we can be connecting with, and how can we build our own leadership system? and develop our own networks and our own leadership skills. I think that's one of the most important ways that we can build resilience. So I come on now to the final topic of Module 3. And people, often say to me, what are the kind of, what are some really practical ways to think about resilience and engaging people in change? And, over the years, I've worked with hundreds of different models, and there's probably a handful that over the last 20 years I come back to time and time again. And, the thing about models, the statistician George Box says this, all models are wrong, but some of them are useful. And this is a model that I use often in health and care, and I think many of you will know this model already. So this is the model. It's called the Stages of Change model, or to give it its proper title, the Trans-Theoretical Model of Behaviour Change. And this comes from Prochaska, De Clemente and Norcross. And one of the key reasons why we like to use this model is because it's already used extensively in the health and care system to support behaviour change. And very many colleagues in health and care have already used this, particularly around health-related behaviours. So the most common use of this Stages of Change model is to support people with smoking cessation. But there's many others here: exercise adoption, drug use, weight control. It's used in supporting people who are victims of domestic violence, medication compliance, and so on and so on. And the great thing about this model is it also works for organisational and service change. And when we think back to that lovely 16th century Spanish poem, it gives us a perspective for thinking about resistance to change. So let's use an example. So we said that smoking cessation is the most common use of this model. So what we do, how it works, is we have to work out what stage of change somebody is at, and then we have to plan a change intervention based on the stage that they're at. And there are 5 stages. So it starts at pre-contemplation, where somebody's thinking, I don't recognise I need to do this, I'm not interested in doing this. And then right the way through to taking action and maintenance. So let's illustrate this model by using the example of smoking. So when somebody is pre-contemplative, okay, who smokes, what their basically their attitude is, I'm not aware that my smoking's a problem, or if I am aware of it, I don't care, and I've got no intention to quit. That's somebody who's pre-contemplative. They're not even contemplating changing. The next stage is contemplation, and when I get to this stage, I am starting to think about changing. I'm starting to recognise that my smoking is a problem, and I probably do want to stop, but I've got no plans yet. So when somebody is contemplative, often they're yo-yoing. One day I'm thinking I'm going to give up, the next day I'm not. Okay? Then we go on to the next stage, which is preparation. And when I get to this stage, I have decided that I'm going to give up smoking on the 1st of April, and I've got my my nicotine patches, and I'm going to the NHS service, and I'm getting ready to give up on the 1st of April. And then stage 4, we have action. So when I get to stage 4, it's the 1st of April, and I've actually stopped smoking. Fantastic. And then the final stage is maintenance. And this is about continuing to not smoke. And sometimes I go to the pub and I have some wine and I think, oh, I'd really like to smoke, but I'm managing to not smoke. Okay, so that's the model. So let's go back and think about this. Looking at those 5 stages, okay. Which stage do most change activities in the health and care system actually focus on? So when you think of change initiatives that you're involved in, okay, what stage do they focus on? Okay, will you put some numbers in the chat box? do they focus on people that are contemplative or contemplated or preparing, or do they focus on action, or do they focus on maintenance? What does anybody think? Anyone put a number in the chat box? We got any? So Kate or
yeah,
are you
so
seeing some numbers?
4 is the one that's coming out most. There's also a few people saying 2, but 4 is the one that's coming out.
Okay, and so 4's coming up the most. And what stage are most people actually at? So we might be focused on stage 4. Okay, so trying to get people to take action. What's the reality of where most people are at?
Yeah. Helen, the number 1 is coming up a lot.
Yeah, 1 or 2. I absolutely would concur with that. I think that very often in health and care, as change agents, we're trying to get people to take action, but the reality is that most people are pre-contemplative or contemplative at best. And the thing about this approach, what it tells us is that if somebody is at stage 1, they're pre-contemplative, then what we need to do in our change intervention is move them to contemplation stage 2. It's impossible for people to go more than one stage at a time. And yet what we keep doing all the time in the health and care system is trying to get people that are pre-contemplative or contemplative at best to take action. Okay, and it's not a great strategy. Okay, just one final question. Looking at those 5, which is the stage at which people need the most help, but it's the stage that the help is most likely to be taken away?
Interestingly, Helen, we're getting a range of answers for that, but 5 and 2 and 3 are coming up quite a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I would say 5. That we put in a new system or a new process of care, and then as soon as we've done that, often we take the people away that have been, that are supporting it, and that leave people to wobble. And you see, what we see time and time again is that 90% of the tools that are available for change agents in health and care are designed for the action stage. And yet, as we're saying, most people that we're trying to engage in the change, they're at stage 1 or stage 2 at best. So the reality is that our tools are often not effective at the stage of change that people are at. It's really hard to engage people because we're trying to make them take action and they're not even thinking about it. People get very irritated, defensive and irrational, and we as change agents feel powerless in our ability to lead or facilitate the change. I just want to show you a practical example of this, which is the introduction of the World Health Organization Surgical Safety Checklist. So basically what happened with this was, there were a group of clinicians in the USA who showed through observational studies real opportunities for improving patient safety, patient surgical safety, by the use of a checklist, across the process. So governments and public health systems all over the world mandated it through targets. So, surgical teams were told, you have to do this. And even though there was a very compelling case for change, people resisted it. And this is a classic scenario of, people being told to comply with action at stage 4 when they are at stage 1 or 2 at best. And people did the task often and they missed the point. And I just want to show you a couple of pieces of published evidence around this. This was a study around, why do checklists fail? And it's interesting because if you actually read the qualitative comments, they're classic. stage 1 comments, you know. So in 51% of cases, staff resisted or failed to complete the checklist, okay? And, you know, the quote here, when the surgeons weren't on board, you were told to, oh, shut up and let's get on with it, okay? That's classic stage 4 behaviour, okay? 34% said the checklist was inappropriate or illogical. And again, the quote, you know, it's a bit bizarre and there's a sense of I'm not actually progressing the patient care with this question, okay? Again, you know, these are people who are being asked to take action that isn't meaningful, doesn't make sense to them, okay? Again, classic stage 1. And then 29% said the checklist was thought to be a waste of time. Yet more delays. Oh gosh, we're going to get less work done for the patients. Again, you know, a classic stage 1 response. And just another report that was published here by the University of Leicester, optimising surgical safety checklist implementation. And, you know, particularly, I mean, what's great about this, you can see in the blue there, you know, what do we need to do to enable this to work? But I think that the quote at the bottom is pertinent. In hospitals without adequate resources and efficient systems, simply requiring the checklist to be used might not only fail to improve patient safety, but might also introduce new risks for staff and patients. This is the exact opposite of what the checklist was designed to achieve. And you know, I think lots and lots of organisations in the UK and across the world are doing great things with the checklist. But in many places, it's been a situation of taking action at stage 4 when people are at stage 1. So, what do we tend to do, you know, in this scenario when, as change agents, we're trying to get people to take action at stage 4? When they're only at stage, the reality is the people that we're trying to get to change are at stage 1 or 2. We end up lowering our ambition for improvement as change agents. We find the people who are already at the action stage and willing to take the action and focus on them. We put those negative labels on people who aren't yet at stage 4, like blocker or resistor or laggard. And then when people still won't take the action, what sometimes happens is that we blame the management for not enforcing the change. You know, you should make people do it. And, you know, I really love this quote from George Bernard Shaw. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place. You know, to what extent have we really sat down with people, explained, heard their point of view and perspective? So, you know, what should we be doing? Okay, what we should be doing is that we should be listening and understanding you know, where people are at, appreciating their starting points, finding out their interests and elaborating it. Okay, and you know, this whole idea, like the theme of this module, let's roll with resistance. You know, don't argue against it. And again, I think this ties in with this point about facts. You know, don't argue with them and say these are the facts, because people won't, you know, won't change by and large. Be curious about the other person's point of view and accepting. And encourage them to elaborate their resistance. You know, what makes this so hard for you to do? What would help? And again, you know, just going back to that data, that qualitative data from the checklist study, you know, the problem is that it's not meaningful. People don't feel conviction to do this. How can we build meaning and conviction into the change? And what you'll see in your study guide for Module 3 is that we set out a whole table of the 5 different stages, and what it shows in the study guide is, you know, like how to stand in the shoes of people, and how somebody at stage 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 will be thinking. And what it also does is it says what we should do as change agents. So I think it's very helpful this for you know, in terms of when we're trying to make change happen, you know, let's understand the key stakeholders, let's understand where they're at. And if they're at stage 1 or 2, let's not try and force them to take action at stage 4. So here it says, you know, the idea of somebody at stage 1, you know, the focus shouldn't be on getting people to take action, but actually we've got to create awareness of the need for change. And remember that if I'm a pre-contemplator, then the goal is not to try and make me change or take action immediately, but to help me to move to contemplation. Now, this has helped me so much over the years, and I still make this mistake all the time. So, just keep referring back, keep thinking, what stage are people at is really important. I think the kind of final thing I wanted to say is that, most people aren't just resistant for the sake of being resistant. It's a set of circumstances, and it's how we're going about the change. But I think there are some people who are so skeptical and cynical about change that it's never going to happen, and I think that as change agents we need to be putting our effort and energy into those people that have got the potential to change. And going back to what Mark was saying earlier, actually intervening with those people at the very early stages of the change process, not leaving it right to the end and then trying to get them to buy in. But for those people who are never going to change, we need to walk away. And I quite like this Cherokee proverb. If your horse dies, get off it. There will be people who are just never going to engage with the change. So I think what I'll do, I'll leave with that great quote from George Bernard Shaw again. I hope that this has been a helpful module, and it's certainly stimulated a lot of ideas. Let's just get a very, very quick check-in with our chat and Twitter monitors. So Kate and Catherine, anything you'd like to tell us about?
I was going to say, where do I start? There's been so much discussion, and it's fantastic. I think there's been a lot of reflective learning today, and people are really digging deep and thinking about their own actions within their change programs, and how we engage the wider group to support change. So I think that's been a really big thing, and there will be those discussions carrying on in the next session. And I think one of the things that stood out to me was kind of the reflection of we really need to check what we're hearing from others before we move into action, and using that to really kind of support us. And too often we jump straight into action. So and people like the proverb, to get off the horse. So thank you, Helen.
Yeah, great. Catherine, do you want to add anything?
Only that people love the Cherokee proverb almost as much as I do. So
okay.
Great energy on the chat room today.
Lovely. And Ollie and Lewis, what's happening on the Twitter sphere?
Hi Helen, it's Lewis. I don't know whether Ollie can talk, but there's been some great conversations on Twitter at the moment. Lots of people talking about being a lone wolf, but then finding their wolf pack with fellow change agents.
Fab.
Which I think would be a really good hashtag to use, maybe. And then people talking about whether all change is reactive and why change happens. Really, a lot of conversations about that. And then there's a few non-health organisations saying that they're benefiting a lot from the learning from this. So that's great. See, it's transferable.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Lewis, and thanks to all our monitors today. And again, just thinking about this, when we're in situations where are difficult, where people are being resistant, we're not feeling very resilient. Let's think about perspective and think more broadly around what might be happening and where the opportunities are. So at this point, I am going to hand over to Ollie, and I hope that that most of you will be joining the breakout. So for those of you that are watching this as a recording, this is the point at which we say goodbye, and really look forward to connecting with you again next time when the topic is making